You've likely been taught that being authentic is the ultimate goal. We live in an age of curated social media profiles, self-branding, and increasingly AI everything. And in this landscape, authenticity seems to offer the promise of something beyond all that. A real you, stripped of all the things you do to impress others. It's been very evident that in recent years, trends online have shifted, where influencers have moved away from perfectly airbrushed photos from their lavish vacations towards makeup-free, front-facing videos sharing their unfiltered thoughts and like a blurry off-center photo of the local bodega. This is obviously a move towards something that is meant to be more authentic, although of course it ends up just like becoming its own kind of superficial performance. And a lot of brands have talked about in recent years wanting like more authentic user-generated content and so forth. I think it's also likely that you've heard the call to be authentic when it comes to living out your hopes and dreams. Don't follow the crowd, but be yourself and good things will follow, a kind of graduation speech type of approach. Well, I'm here to tell you that two contemporary philosophers, Hans-Georg Moeller and Paul D'Ambrosio, think that all of this appeal to authenticity is a bunch of BS. Such calls for authenticity, whatever form they take, are hollow in the present day because we've simply moved past an age when authenticity means anything. Moeller and D'Ambrosio argue in their book, You and Your Profile, that we're entering a new age, the age of what they call profilicity. And this requires a new understanding of our personal and collective identity goals. Before we unpack what profilicity is, let's explore the ideal that it is supplanting. Moeller and D'Ambrosio track a movement from sincerity to authenticity to profilicity. And they draw on the work of Lionel Trilling to distinguish the first two, sincerity and authenticity, because that's a distinction that comes from his work. Societies value sincerity when there is an allegiance to traditional roles, such as tribal, ethnic, religious, and family roles. These are roles that are ready-made at birth, and the sincere person must commit completely to the roles in which they find themselves. So let's say I'm born into a family of Lutheran bakers, and it is strongly expected of me from birth that I too will be a Lutheran baker. I must learn my craft and adhere to my religion, as my social roles are understood to be morally correct. Any deviation from them is treated as insincere. I must perform my role well, and in principle, anyone can do this. We all have roles, and we can all perform them well. So the ideal of sincerity is open to all. Things change with the move to modernity on Trilling's account. Modernity brings about a higher degree of choice about one's roles and an unprecedented level of social mobility. This brings with it a new ideal, authenticity. As opposed to having your role ready-made for you at birth, as in the sincerity model, in modernity, identity increasingly becomes a problem for people, something to be discovered. And this implies that there is some true self beneath the roles, right? Some self out there to discover. You might think about Rousseau here. Recall that Rousseau believes our social roles are superficial and that we instead should try and connect with the inner voice of nature. Deep within ourselves, our true self is to be found. The ideal of authenticity, at least as Trilling understands it, and like I said, they're drawing from his view, is essentially a romantic ideal. It's the goal of being original and independent, a true individual. As opposed to identifying with the roles we perform as in sincerity, authenticity demands identifying with something beneath those roles, which you alone can discover. And at least historically, this is also treated as associated with feeling over reason, such that the authenticity ideal, and this is something that Moeller and D'Ambrosio don't really get at, but the authenticity ideal is an ideal of deep, passionate connection to life. This is something we saw with the study of Rousseau. One thing to add about authenticity here is that this ideal also differs from sincerity because it doesn't quite seem to be open to everyone. Although everyone has a chance to act out their pre-given social roles sincerely, The authenticity ideal tends to be open only to some people, namely to those who pursue an individual process of self-discovery, which also means having the means to do so, the kind of freedom to pursue yourself. Now, Moeller and D'Ambrosio argue that we can be said to be entering a new age, beyond the ideal of authenticity that has held sway in modernity. One of the key factors here is the rise of digital life. As they point out, today we have fewer opportunities for personal interaction between people, and we live in an increasingly anonymous society where different people take on highly different personas in different contexts. I was literally just seeing an article this morning about how the rise of work from home culture means that people are interacting with so many fewer people on a day-to-day basis than they would have been before. We can also see how being increasingly online also can fragment yourself, or at least your personas, so that like you're really one person on Zoom, but maybe you're a completely different person on Reddit. You're like known for your spicy takes on Love Island, but in the office or in the virtual office of Zoom, you're known for your conscientious work on expense reports. And then to your partner, you're known as an extremely gentle-hearted and caring person, in real life, so to speak. So it's true on the one hand that people have always had different personas to some extent, right? The Lutheran baker is gonna have like one persona in the bakery than they're gonna have in church. Living in the society of sincerity, nonetheless, had a lot more continuity to it, and therefore the Lutheran baker's identity had a lot more continuity to it than the person that I've just mentioned, who, works from home and is on Zoom, but then also on Reddit and so on. This is why it's so easy for people to get away with being trolls online, because of the sheer anonymity and fracturing of our social fabric. In addition to these factors, Moeller and D'Ambrosio highlight the rise of second-order observation, which is a concept from the theorist Niklas Luhmann. Instead of seeing the Mona Lisa, we now see the Mona Lisa through our cell phones when we go to the Louvre and take a picture of it. What's more, we see ourselves seeing the Mona Lisa by uploading a picture of it to our social media. I mean, maybe actually uploading it in today's day would be cringe, but you get the idea. Maybe you would instead upload like a small blurry corner of it in your photo dump. But I don't know, maybe you're watching this video years later and even that reference is totally outdated. In any case, our self-observation here becomes second order. We're seeing ourselves through the imagined lens of a person looking at our profile, rather than just seeing ourselves as we imagine ourselves to be. I literally just did that, I'm realizing, when I was like, maybe you're watching this a few years later. I'm engaging in second order observation when I am imagining myself as being seen by a viewer, potentially a viewer years from now, right? Second order observation is being seen as being seen. And this is to some extent, kind of version of the dynamics of recognition that we've encountered in the earlier video on recognition. But it also introduces something new, which is the profile. And the profile is, in principle, something seen by anyone, what Moeller and D'Ambrosio call the general peer, so that identity becomes essentially public. Something that also came up in discussions around this with my class this past semester were that this also renders identity work more asynchronous than before, right? If you're seeing someone see you in real life, that's essentially synchronous experience. Whereas if you're posting a tweet and imagining that somebody might see it, or I'm posting a video and imagining so that somebody might see it years from now, there's a much more asynchronous kind of character to this profile work than there was to the dynamics of recognition. So sincerity and authenticity no longer make any sense, Moeller and D'Ambrosio think, under the conditions of second order observation. Instead, a new way of achieving personal identity comes to the fore. Profilicity. Profilicity is assuming identity through public accounts of oneself. Here, identity is formed through curating profiles. And profiles are images of ourselves that are presented for second-order observation. This involves a kind of return to one aspect of sincerity which authenticity had turned away from, an emphasis on performance. So recall that authenticity rejected the ideal of sincerely acting out your roles. It wasn't a matter of performing your roles well. It was more a matter of connecting inwardly, privately with some self that was unobservable by others. Profilicity re-emphasizes performance, right? It's not about finding some like inner truth of who you are, but rather curating your profiles for the public eye. But unlike sincerity, these roles aren't ones you've been given at birth. They don't even bear a clear relation to your daily activities necessarily. They are curated profiles. And this is why Moeller and D'Ambrosio say that the production of images is profile-based identity work. When you take a selfie or post a photo from your vacation, you're not presenting a false image of your identity to others. You are actually building your identity through images. When other people look at our profiles, they see how we like to be seen as being seen. So it's obvious that this is a selected and edited form of self-presentation, but it is self-presentation nonetheless. And moreover, we don't just have one profile. We need to have highly differentiated and diverse profiles under the conditions of profilicity. Your LinkedIn profile is different from your Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat profile, and so on. This is why they even think that branding isn't quite the right word for this. Under conditions of profilicity, you're not one brand, but many. And your identity is also dynamically shifting over time. So recall now that one of the shifts from sincerity to authenticity was how accessible this ideal is. Sincerity is accessible to everyone, but authenticity only to some. This trend becomes even stronger with profilicity. Only a few have what it takes to succeed in the age of the profile, Moeller and D'Ambrosio point out. Only a few influencers will rise to the top. Only a few people, they say, can be high profile. And, maybe that's all well and good, you might be thinking. You don't want to be famous anyway, you might be thinking, right? There was some recent study that came out about how far fewer young people today say they want to be famous than just a few years ago. I think there's been a real backlash against this expectation that we be high profile. But even if that's your view, Moeller and D'Ambrosio suggest that it's not so easy just to reject the value of profilicity, because it's something so increasingly baked into our culture and our very material ways of being that we can't just choose to cast it off. From the perspective of sincerity, profilicity looks insincere. And from the perspective of authenticity, profilicity looks inauthentic.